Long before man measured the world with his machines, long before the names of beasts were written in ink, there were stories whispered under the desert wind. Stories of creatures too vast to be tamed, too ancient to be known. Among them, one name echoed through the sands of faith and fear alike. Behemoth. It is not the monster of nightmares, nor the beast that stalks the dark. Behemoth is something deeper, older, and far more profound. It was said to be the first creature of the land, shaped from the very bones of the earth itself. When the rivers carved their way through stone and the mountains rose like breaths of a sleeping god, Behemoth was there, watching, breathing, enduring. The book of Job speaks of it in trembling awe. A creature that drinks rivers and fears none. Its bones are like bars of bronze, its frame like iron. No spear could pierce its hide, no hunter could claim its life. To the people of that age, Behemoth was the living symbol of what no human hand could control. It was the embodiment of the wild world before man's dominion, a mirror held up to remind us of our smallness beneath the Creator's gaze. But who, or what, was Behemoth really? Was it a hippopotamus, as scholars later guessed? A lost species of giant that once walked the primeval earth? Or was it something more? An idea, a manifestation of divine power that words could barely contain. The story of Behemoth is more than a tale of a creature. It is the echo of humanity's struggle to understand nature, to comprehend the vast and untamed. From the heat of Mesopotamia to the scrolls of the Hebrew prophets, Behemoth became a riddle that bridged heaven and earth. It stood at the border between myth and theology, between the seen and the unseen. Tonight, we will travel into that borderland. We will return to the dust and the dawn of faith, to the verses that shaped the imagination of civilizations. We will seek the meaning of a creature whose name still stirs the imagination of believers and skeptics alike. For within the shadow of Behemoth lies a truth that reaches beyond time, beyond creed, and into the core of what it means to face the unknown. This is the story of Behemoth, the beast of the earth, the breath of creation itself. In the age when men spoke to the heavens with the language of awe rather than the language of science, there was a tale that rose from the dust of the east. It began with a question, whispered not by scholars or kings, but by a man brought low by suffering. His name was Job, and in the silence of his pain, he demanded to know why the world was built with such cruelty and wonder intertwined. Out of that silence came a voice not of man, but of God, a voice that thundered through the storm and into eternity. It was within that voice that the name Behemoth was spoken. Behemoth was not introduced as a myth or a curiosity, it was declared as a proof of power beyond comprehension, proof that the world was not for man to measure or to rule, but to behold and to fear. In the passage, the Lord tells Job to behold Behemoth, the beast that eats grass like an ox, yet bends the very earth beneath its feet. Its muscles ripple with the strength of mountains, and its bones are said to be bars of bronze. No man can approach it, no hunter can bind it. It moves through the reeds and swamps of creation, as though the world itself were built for its steps. The ancient listeners who first heard these words did not imagine a mere animal. They saw something primal, something vast. Behemoth was not a creature of flesh alone, but of essence. It was the wildness of the land personified. It was the pulse of the earth when the first dawn broke. The people who heard Job's story lived in a world where every thunderclap was divine speech, every river a living thing, every desert a silent witness to something sacred. In such a world, Behemoth was not a monster but a message a reminder that creation was not crafted for human comfort. The book of Job stands apart in the scriptures because it dares to question God. It asks why the righteous suffer and why the innocent fall. Yet when the answer comes, it is not in logic, but in mystery. God does not explain human pain. He reveals the immensity of his creation. He names the storm, the sea, and the behemoth. Through this creature, God speaks not of cruelty, but of proportion. Man is small, the world is vast, and within that vastness dwells the sacred. Scholars and poets have tried for centuries to interpret what Behemoth might have been. To some, it is a hippopotamus, an enormous beast that lives in the rivers of the Near East. To others, it is a mythic reflection of strength itself. But within the poetry of Job, Behemoth transcends definition. The description is too grand, too symbolic, too deliberate. It breathes fireless majesty. It exists not merely in the world, but as a boundary between the human and the divine. The moment Job is told to behold Behemoth, he is being asked to look upon the face of creation and to understand his place within it. Imagine the world of Job. The burning sky over the deserts of Uz, the dry winds moving over cracked earth, the herds grazing under the relentless sun. To those who worked the soil and watched the storms roll over the horizon, the world was not dead matter. It was alive, conscious, unpredictable. When they spoke of Behemoth, they spoke of that living world. They gave a name to the power that shook the ground and stirred the rivers. It was easier to name the unknown than to face the terror of it without shape. Behemoth became the shape of awe itself. In the Hebrew language, the name Behemoth is plural, yet it refers to a single being. It means not one beast, but the very concept of beasts, the totality of life that crawls upon the land. Some interpreters believe this plural form is a sign of majesty, the way kings and gods are spoken of in tongues that cannot contain their power. In that sense, Behemoth is not just an animal, it is the embodiment of life that resists control. It stands in contrast to Leviathan, the sea creature of chaos, and together they mirror the duality of existence, land and sea, matter and spirit, stability and turmoil. For ancient listeners, these were not metaphors but realities. To speak of Behemoth was to speak of the world's very bones. The mountains were its ribs, the rivers its veins. Its breath was the wind that moved across the fields. To look upon the land and see Behemoth was to acknowledge that creation was not human property. It belonged to forces older and wiser than humanity itself. As centuries passed, the name Behemoth began to shift. Theologians debated its nature. Philosophers saw in it a lesson about pride and humility. Artists imagined it as a creature of monumental scale, grazing upon the edge of Eden, its shadow stretching across the dawn. In some Jewish traditions, Behemoth and Leviathan were destined to battle at the end of days, each representing the primal powers of creation that would be undone when the world was renewed. Their flesh, it was said, would feed the righteous in the feast of the new heaven and new earth. This is how myth and faith intertwined. The literal and the symbolic merged until no one could tell where one ended and the other began. To say that Behemoth was real is both true and false. It is real in the way that mountains are real, in the way that fear and wonder are real. It is an idea carved into the consciousness of humanity, a mirror for the part of the soul that longs to touch what it cannot grasp. The voice that spoke to Job did not describe Behemoth to satisfy curiosity. It was a declaration of scale. Humanity seeks meaning in every shadow, but Behemoth stands as the shadow of meaning itself. It is the reminder that some truths are too vast for language, that the Creator is not to be understood, but to be revered. The beast is not the enemy of man. It is his teacher, silent and unyielding, showing the limits of human dominion. Picture, for a moment, standing in Job's place. The wind whips through the valley. Thunder rolls in the distance. The sky breaks with light as if the heavens themselves have been torn open. In that storm, the voice calls out. It speaks of Behemoth, and for the first time, you feel the weight of the earth beneath you, not as ground, but as something alive. The mountains pulse, the rivers hum. The air itself carries the sound of an ancient breath. That is Behemoth. Not a beast to be hunted, but a truth to be witnessed. As the book closes, Job says no more. His questions are answered, though not in the way he expected. He has seen the power of the world and found his place within it. Behemoth remains, silent and unseen, grazing in the fields of eternity. Its legend moves through generations, carried in verses and visions, waiting for each new age to behold it again and wonder. When the voice of the Creator faded from the whirlwind, the echo of Behemoth remained. It lingered not as a sound, but as a presence, a tremor beneath the soil, and a pulse within every living thing. To understand Behemoth is to understand the earth itself, for in every root that breaks the ground, and every river that carves its path through stone, the spirit of that ancient beast still stirs. Behemoth wasn't made to rule nor to be ruled. It was made to exist, to bear witness to the silent might of creation, and to remind humankind that the world beneath their feet was never theirs to command. In the ancient world, people did not see land as a possession, but as a living force. The earth was both giver and taker, fertile and merciless. Crops grew only by the mercy of rain, and rain came only by the will of heaven. To these early eyes, Behemoth was not a creature in the ordinary sense. It was the soul of the land, vast and unmoving, feeding on the green of the earth, but bound by no hunger that man could satisfy. Its presence was the weight of the mountain pressing into the sky, the deep hum of the valley when the wind passed through. The scripture describes Behemoth as feeding among the reeds, its belly near the waters, its strength in its loins, its power in the muscles of its belly. Its tail sways like a cedar tree, its bones like iron. It drinks from the river without fear, for even the flood cannot move it. To the poet who wrote these words, Behemoth was the definition of steadfastness. The world could shake, the waters could rise, but the creature of the earth would stand unmoved. In its unshakable nature lay a truth about the Creator himself. Those who have studied the text have long noticed how Behemoth is paired with Leviathan, the creature of the sea. Together they form a balance, two halves of existence. Leviathan is chaos, the rolling depth that no man can plumb, the twisting serpent that represents all that is untamed in the waters. Behemoth is its counterpart, the stillness of the land, the power that sleeps beneath the soil. The two are not enemies, but reflections, earth and sea, body and spirit. Creation's inhale and exhale. In the world that gave birth to these stories, balance was the heart of understanding. The people of the Near East saw nature not as good or evil, but as a series of forces that must be kept in harmony. When storms raged or earthquakes broke the ground, they did not see mere disaster. They saw imbalance. And in restoring balance through worship, through sacrifice, through remembrance, they sought to align themselves with the rhythm of creation. Behemoth represented that rhythm in its purest form. It did not fight the flow of life. It was the flow itself. Imagine standing at the edge of the Jordan River thousands of years ago. The water moves with the patience of eternity, carving its way through time. The reeds sway, whispering secrets older than any human word. Somewhere beneath that stillness you feel it. The ground vibrates faintly, not from footsteps but from something deeper, the slow pulse of the earth breathing. That is the domain of Behemoth. It is not a sound that can be heard, nor a sight that can be seen clearly. It is a feeling, the awareness that the world around you is alive in ways that defy comprehension. The ancient Hebrews did not invent Behemoth in isolation. Around them, in Babylon and in Egypt, in Sumer and in Canaan, myths of great beasts had long been told. The Mesopotamians spoke of Anzu, the lion-headed storm bird that stole the tablets of destiny. The Babylonians told of Tiamat, the sea dragon of chaos who gave birth to the gods and was slain by Marduk to bring order to the world. Each culture saw in these creatures a reflection of the forces they feared and revered. The Hebrews took these echoes and reshaped them within their faith. Behemoth and Leviathan became not rivals of the divine, but instruments of it, embodiments of creation's might placed under the authority of one God. This transformation marked a profound shift in human thought. Where other myths saw the universe as a battlefield between gods, the Hebrew vision saw a single creator whose power encompassed both order and chaos. Behemoth was no longer a rival spirit, but a servant of divine will, existing not to defy, but to display. Its sheer power was not rebellion, but testimony. The strength of its limbs, the immensity of its form, the fear it inspired in all who imagined it, these were not threats to faith, but affirmations of it. As centuries passed, the land itself seemed to carry the memory of Behemoth. In the songs of shepherds, in the prayers of wanderers, in the writings of prophets, there remained the conviction that the world was alive with purpose. Every thunderclap, every quake, every breath of wind was a reminder of the same truth. Humanity was a guest in a house it did not build. To stand upon the earth was to stand upon something sacred. To exploit it without reverence was to forget the lesson of Behemoth. In later Jewish writings, Behemoth and Leviathan were given a role in the end of days. The legends say that they were created on the same day and set apart, one in the sea and one upon the land, to wait until the appointed time. When the day of judgment arrives, they will rise again, and their struggle will shake the foundations of the world. But even in that struggle, balance will be restored. Their conflict will not be born of malice, but of completion. Their defeat will mark not destruction, but renewal, a return to the harmony that existed in the beginning. To the mystics, this story was not about beasts at all. It was about the soul of creation. The land and the sea, the material and the spiritual, the seen and the unseen, all bound together in a dance of eternal return. Behemoth was the anchor, the body of the world, the weight that kept existence from drifting into chaos. Its breath was the wind that gives life to all that grows. Its heart was the fire buried deep within the earth, unseen yet essential. Some early rabbis taught that when the Messiah comes, the righteous will feast upon the flesh of Behemoth, not as an act of violence but of communion. To partake in the creature's strength was to share in the power of creation itself, to taste the perfection of what was once feared. In that vision, Behemoth ceases to be a monster and becomes a sacrament, a bridge between man and the divine. Across generations, the meaning of Behemoth shifted, yet one truth endured. It was always bound to the earth. The dust beneath the feet of prophets, the clay from which humanity was shaped, the soil that receives the dead and births new life, all of it was tied to the essence of this creature. To understand Behemoth was to understand that the ground itself is holy. Even in our modern world, where satellites orbit the skies and machines map the depths of the planet, that old truth remains. The earth still breathes. We still stand upon something alive. The ancient people did not have our science, yet they felt what many have forgotten, that the world is not a lifeless sphere of rock, but a being of rhythm and breath. In that rhythm lies Behemoth. Perhaps that is why the story endures. It speaks to something buried deep within human memory, the sense that we are part of something greater and older than ourselves. When the storm comes and the earth shakes, when the mountains groan and the sea roars, we are reminded that we live within a living thing. Behemoth is that reminder made flesh. As the night settles and the wind carries the scent of rain, you can almost feel it. Beneath the surface, beneath the noise of the human world, the slow pulse continues. The heartbeat of the planet, steady and vast, older than words or names. It is not a creature that can be hunted or caged. It is the breath of creation itself, waiting in silence for those who still remember how to listen. The story of Behemoth does not exist in a vacuum. It rose from a world layered with older tales, voices of civilizations that lived and vanished long before the words of Job were written. To understand the origin of this creature, one must travel backward through time, beyond the deserts of Canaan, across the rivers of Mesopotamia, to the cradle of the world's oldest myths. There, beneath the ziggurats and within the clay tablets of Babylon, we find the echoes that shaped the Hebrew imagination. Among those echoes, one name rises again and again: Tiamat. In the Babylonian creation epic known as the Enuma Elish, Tiamat is the goddess of the primeval sea. She is chaos incarnate, a vast serpent or dragon whose body contains the waters from which all things are born. When the younger gods rebel against her authority, the storm god Marduk rises to face her. Their battle shakes the heavens. Marduk splits her body in two, creating the sky from one half and the earth from the other. From her slain form, the ordered world emerges. Out of chaos comes creation. Out of death comes life. This story is not merely a tale of conflict, but a vision of the universe itself. The Babylonians believed that the cosmos was a fragile balance between chaos and order, and that this balance had to be maintained through ritual and devotion. Tiamat was both feared and revered. She represented the untamed potential of existence, the wild sea that could at any moment rise and consume the works of men. When Marduk defeated her, he did not destroy chaos, but harnessed it. The world was built from her remains, and her power continued to flow beneath the surface of all creation. When the Hebrew exiles lived among the Babylonians, they heard these stories. They watched the rituals and listened to the chants that praised Marduk as the Lord of Order. But their faith was different. They did not believe in many gods struggling for power. They believed in one God who ruled over all things. Yet even so, the imagery of those ancient myths seeped into their worldview. When they spoke of Leviathan and Behemoth, they were not inventing new creatures but transforming old symbols. They took the chaos serpent of Tiamat and the primal beasts of Babylon and placed them under the sovereignty of a single creator. In this transformation lies one of the great turning points in human thought. The Mesopotamians saw the universe as a struggle between competing divine forces. The Hebrews saw it as a reflection of one will. In their scriptures, the monsters of chaos were no longer enemies of God, but instruments of his power. Leviathan, the serpent of the sea, was no longer Tiamat defying heaven. It was now a servant, formed and restrained by divine authority. Behemoth, in turn, became the counterpart on land, a creature not of rebellion, but of balance. Yet the shadow of Tiamat remained. The descriptions of Leviathan in the Psalms and in the Book of Job still carry the echoes of her form. The twisting coils, the breath of flame, the power to churn the deep, all of it recalls the sea dragon of Babylon, and beside her, in the realm of earth, stands Behemoth, vast and immovable like the other half of a cosmic equation. The two are not born from conflict but from complement. Together they preserve the memory of the ancient myth, but place it within a new theology. This reimagining speaks to something profound in the human spirit. Every culture seeks to explain the forces that shape its world. Storms, earthquakes, droughts, and floods were not random events to the ancients. They were expressions of personality, will, and emotion. To name those forces was to understand them, to make peace with their unpredictability. The Babylonians named Tiamat. The Hebrews named Behemoth. Both names point to the same truth, that the world is alive with powers beyond human control. In the ruins of Babylon, archaeologists have uncovered tablets covered in cuneiform, their wedge-shaped marks preserving the voices of priests and poets from over 3,000 years ago. In those lines, Tiamat's fury is described in detail. She births monsters to fight for her cause, dragons, serpents, scorpion men, and beasts of flame. Her armies fill the heavens. When Marduk rises to confront her, he fashions weapons of wind and storm, capturing her in his net and striking her heart. From her sundered body, the order of the world begins. The Hebrews, inheriting this cosmology, rewrote it with divine unity. Where the Babylonians saw conflict, they saw design. Where Marduk needed to fight, their god needed only to speak. Still, the imagery of the beast endured. It was too powerful to vanish. The idea that creation emerged from the taming of chaos resonated across generations. To the people of Israel, the sea remained a symbol of danger and disorder. The land, though solid, was equally untamable in its vastness. Behemoth embodied that truth. It was the land's own form of chaos, silent, immense, indifferent, to human desire. Yet unlike Tiamat, Behemoth did not need to be slain. Its existence was its lesson. By enduring, it revealed the majesty of the Creator who could shape such power and still hold it in balance. When we read the poetry of Job, we hear faint echoes of the Enuma Elish, but the tone is transformed. The ancient battle becomes a meditation. The chaos once feared becomes an instrument of awe. Behemoth, standing firm on the earth, does not threaten divine order. It completes it. It shows that the wild and the sacred are not opposites, but companions. In this way, the myth of Tiamat does not disappear. It is redeemed. Across time, this transformation gave birth to new ideas. The concept that creation was born from chaos influenced later philosophers and theologians. Even in the modern age, scientists speak of order emerging from the void, of structure rising from randomness. The language has changed, but the pattern remains. Every beginning carries a trace of chaos. Every act of creation requires something to be tamed, whether it be the waters of Tiamat or the untamed potential of the universe itself. Behemoth stands as a symbol of that eternal truth. It is the Earth's memory of chaos, subdued but not destroyed. Its massive form speaks of ancient power held in restraint, a power that could, if unleashed, return the world to its primal state. The poet of Job knew this instinctively. To describe Behemoth was to describe creation's foundation. Its bones of bronze and sinews of iron were metaphors for the stability that holds back the flood of disorder. In this way, the Hebrew and Babylonian visions converge. Both see creation as a delicate balance between power and peace, between chaos and form. The difference lies only in the source of that balance. For the Babylonians, it was maintained through ritual and sacrifice, through pleasing the gods who might at any moment unleash the sea again. For the Hebrews, it was maintained by divine will alone, a covenant written not in stone, but in existence itself. Behemoth, silent and steadfast, is the embodiment of that covenant. If one listens closely to the rhythm of the earth, to the sound of wind through grass, or the distant roll of thunder, it is possible to hear what those ancient poets heard. It is not the voice of war, but of equilibrium. It is the deep hum of life sustained by forces too vast to name. The Babylonians called it Tiamat. The Hebrews called it Behemoth. Both names point to the same mystery, the breath that animates the world, the balance between fury and peace that keeps the cosmos whole. To this day, the image of the beast carries power. It appears in art and literature, in theology and science, each generation finding in it a reflection of its own understanding of creation. Some see Behemoth as a remnant of myth, a poetic symbol of untamed nature. Others see it as a window into humanity's earliest attempt to grasp the infinite. But whether myth or metaphor, it endures because it speaks to something timeless. It tells us that the world we inhabit was born not from simplicity but from struggle, not from stillness but from the storm. And so the shadow of Tiamat lingers, not as a rival deity, but as the memory of the forces that once ruled unchecked. Her echo lives on in the roar of oceans and the shifting of continents. Her breath is the wind that moves through the valleys. And in the quiet strength of the earth, in the immovable weight of mountains and plains, her reflection stands. It has a new name now, one that the world has carried for thousands of years. Behemoth. When the exiled prophets of Israel returned from the rivers of Babylon, they carried more than memories of captivity. They brought with them a new understanding of their world. The land they called home was harsh, a place of sand and stone, of blazing light and silence. Yet in that silence they began to hear something older than the nations that had risen and fallen around them. It was the pulse of the earth itself, the quiet call of creation that no empire could silence. In that vast wilderness, the figure of Behemoth began to take new shape. To the people of the desert, the wilderness was both curse and sanctuary. It was where God spoke to prophets and where the proud were humbled. It was also where the boundaries between the seen and the unseen grew thin. The stories that emerged from this landscape spoke not only of faith, but of awe and fear before the forces of nature. Among these forces, the Behemoth became the living embodiment of the land itself, the great presence that moved beneath the dust and stones, unseen yet felt by all. In the book of Job, when God finally answers the suffering man from the whirlwind, he does not offer comfort or explanation. Instead, he speaks of creation's wonders. He points to Behemoth as a revelation of divine power. The creature is not introduced as a threat, but as a testament. Behold Behemoth, which I made along with you. These words are both intimate and terrifying. Behemoth is a reminder that humanity shares the world with powers it cannot command. It is not the enemy of man, but the measure of his humility. The desert prophets understood this deeply. They had seen the bones of fallen beasts bleaching under the sun. They had watched sandstorms devour whole caravans and rivers appear and vanish within a single season. To them, The land was alive. It breathed and moved according to a will greater than their own. When they spoke of Behemoth, they were not merely recalling an ancient myth. They were naming the spirit of the wilderness, the force that existed beyond human law and beyond human reach. Over time, the image of Behemoth grew to encompass more than the physical world. It became a symbol of endurance. While kingdoms rose and fell, the creature of the earth remained. The Assyrians had carved their empires into the soil. The Babylonians had raised their towers to the heavens. The Persians had stretched their armies across continents. Yet all of them crumbled, leaving behind only ruins and dust. The desert reclaimed what was once theirs, and in that endless reclamation, Behemoth lived on. Ancient writings outside the Hebrew canon also hint at an age when such beings were believed to walk the earth. The Book of Enoch, written centuries before the time of Christ, describes a world of giants born from the union of angels and mortals. These giants consumed the earth's resources, waged war upon its creatures, and brought destruction upon themselves. Though not directly linked to Behemoth, the story carries a similar theme: the struggle between divine order and earthly excess. The giants, like the beast, represent the raw power of creation unrestrained by wisdom. Archaeologists and theologians alike have long been fascinated by these tales. The great bones found in the hills of ancient lands, fossils of creatures unknown to man, may have fueled the legends of giants and monstrous beasts. Long before the word dinosaur was spoken, the sight of such remains must have inspired awe. To the people of those times, these relics were not evidence of extinction, but of divine mystery. They believed that the earth still held the breath of those ancient forms, sleeping beneath the soil. Behemoth, to them, was the guardian of that sleep. In the deserts of Arabia and the plains of Judea, nomadic tribes spoke of creatures that moved like living mountains. They described tremors in the ground, deep rumblings in the night, as if the earth itself were shifting. Some said these were signs of Behemoth stirring beneath the surface, restless in its eternal slumber. Others believed it walked unseen, its massive steps shaping the valleys and ridges. Whether metaphor or belief, the presence of Behemoth became woven into the geography of faith. Every hill and every shadowed canyon carried its echo. As centuries passed, the story of Behemoth continued to evolve. In rabbinic writings, it was said that God created both Behemoth and Leviathan on the same day, one to rule the land and the other the sea. But their power was too great for the world to contain. To prevent them from destroying creation, God placed them apart, binding Leviathan in the depths of the ocean and confining Behemoth to the hidden wilderness. On the final day, according to legend, they would face one another in battle, and their struggle would mark the end of days. Their flesh would feed the righteous, and their defeat would usher in a new world of peace. This apocalyptic vision gave Behemoth a new dimension. It was no longer just a symbol of creation's endurance, but also of its renewal. Its presence linked the beginning of the world with its end, the first breath of life with the final silence. To speak of Behemoth was to speak of time itself, of cycles of destruction and rebirth written into the structure of existence.
The desert, where prophets once wandered and kings once fell, became the stage for these cosmic dramas. In its emptiness, people saw reflection and revelation. The wilderness stripped away illusions of control. It showed humanity its true scale in the face of eternity. In that silence, Behemoth remained as both a warning and a comfort. It reminded the faithful that creation was vast, and that all living things shared a common origin. It also reminded them that power without wisdom could consume everything it touched. The idea of giants and great beasts was not unique to Israel. Across the ancient world, civilizations preserved similar traditions. In Mesopotamia, there were tales of the Anunnaki, towering beings who shaped human destiny. In Egypt, gods took the form of animals, bulls, lions, crocodiles, symbols of divine strength and earthly sovereignty. The Greeks told of the Titans, the first race of gods who were cast down by Zeus and his kin. In every culture, the story was the same. The first beings were immense, untamed, and close to the raw essence of creation. Humanity arrived later, smaller but cunning, tasked with living in the world those giants left behind. Behemoth fits within this grand pattern, but stands apart in one crucial way. It is not a god, not a rebel, not a fallen titan. It is a creature made by the same hand that made man, but without the burden of moral choice. It exists in perfect harmony with its nature. It does not sin, it does not strive, it simply is. In that simplicity lies its greatness. Behemoth does not need to conquer or destroy to prove its power. Its existence is its testimony. It embodies the strength that comes from being wholly what it was created to be. This idea resonated deeply in the hearts of those who sought meaning in suffering. When Job heard of Behemoth, he was reminded not of destruction, but of balance. The creature was vast, yet it harmed no one. It fed upon the grass, dwelled among the reeds, and rested beneath the willows. Its power was bound by peace. To understand Behemoth was to glimpse a world beyond human turmoil, a world in which power and serenity coexisted. As the people of the desert looked upon their world, they began to see traces of this truth everywhere. The mountains that seemed eternal, the rivers that carved their way through rock, the stars that burned without ceasing, all were reflections of Behemoth's silent endurance. The prophets spoke of it in parables, the poets in verses, and the mystics in visions. They saw in the beast a symbol of faith that did not waver, of strength that did not boast. In time, Behemoth became more than a creature of myth. It became a mirror for the soul. To those who sought wisdom, it showed humility. To those who sought power, it showed restraint. And to those who doubted the order of the world, it stood as proof that there was meaning even in the vastness of creation's silence. The age of giants passed, the empires faded, and the desert remained. But the story of Behemoth endured, carried on the lips of wanderers and scholars alike. It survived because it spoke not of conquest but of connection. It reminded humanity that the earth beneath their feet was not lifeless stone, but the body of a living world. Every grain of sand, every gust of wind, every heartbeat of the soil was part of a rhythm older than history itself. And in that rhythm, in that quiet pulse of existence, the call of Behemoth still resounds. It is the sound of the world remembering its beginning, the low hum of creation continuing its song. For those who listen, it is both a mystery and an invitation, a call to see not monsters, but the majesty of the world that birthed them. As the centuries turned and empires faded into dust, the ancient world of prophets and poets gave way to a new era, one dominated by faith and interpretation. The Middle Ages were a time when scripture and myth were woven tightly together, when the unseen was believed to shape every stone, storm, and shadow. In this world, Behemoth did not vanish. It transformed. The beast of the book of Job, once a symbol of divine mystery, became a cornerstone of medieval imagination, a creature not merely of earth, but of theology. The scholars of the early church faced the same question that still echoes today. What was Behemoth? To them, the answer could not be simple. Every word of Scripture was believed to contain layers of meaning, each line a doorway into revelation. Some theologians, like St. Jerome and St. Augustine, saw Behemoth as an allegory rather than a literal creature. In their writings, it represented the power of the flesh, the appetite of the body that had to be controlled by the soul. Just as Behemoth grazed peacefully in the meadows, yet possessed the strength to uproot mountains, so too did human desire possess both beauty and danger. It could nourish life or consume it. In the monasteries of Europe, illuminated manuscripts preserved the image of Behemoth alongside Leviathan and other creatures from Scripture. Artists and scribes, working under candlelight, depicted the beast as a colossal ox, a dragon, or sometimes a creature, unlike anything found in nature. To them, the details were less important than the message. Behemoth was the embodiment of the material world, Leviathan of the spiritual, each bound by divine order. Together they symbolized the balance between heaven and earth, faith and flesh. Theologians of the medieval universities debated its nature in lengthy commentaries. Some, influenced by the natural philosophy of Aristotle, argued that Behemoth was a real animal, a symbol drawn from God's living creation to reveal spiritual truth. Others insisted it was purely metaphoric, an image used by God to humble human reason. The question itself became a mirror of the era's intellectual struggle. Faith sought to understand reason, and reason sought to understand faith. Behemoth, immovable and immense, stood between them, as if reminding mankind that there were limits even to divine inquiry. In the minds of common people, however, Behemoth was not a symbol of philosophy, but a living presence. The medieval world was alive with creatures of wonder. Dragons guarded hidden treasures, griffins ruled the skies, and leviathans haunted the seas. In this landscape of imagination, Behemoth held its ground as the sovereign of the earth. Peasants whispered of giant beasts that lived in the mountains or beneath the plains, whose movements caused earthquakes and whose breath brought storms. The earth itself was believed to be their dwelling place. When the ground trembled, it was said that Behemoth was turning in its sleep. Such stories were not born from ignorance, but from reverence. To the medieval mind, the natural world was the language of God, and every phenomenon carried meaning. The roar of thunder was his voice, the motion of the stars, his clockwork. Behemoth, then, was not feared as a monster, but honored as part of the divine order. Its strength testified to the power of its maker. Its patience testified to his wisdom. In religious art, Behemoth often appeared in scenes of the Last Judgment. Medieval theologians believed that at the end of time, Behemoth and Leviathan would rise from their long sleep to fulfill the prophecy of Job. The righteous would feast upon their flesh, a symbolic act representing the triumph of good over chaos, of divine law over primal nature. This image of a sacred banquet recurred throughout Christian writings of the Middle Ages. It was not about consumption, but transformation. To partake of Behemoth was to partake of the world redeemed. Mystics, however, saw something deeper still. Figures like Hildegard of Bingen, the German abbess and visionary, wrote of the unity of creation in ways that echoed the ancient Hebrew poets. She described the world as a living organism, breathing with divine energy. In her visions, all creatures, from the smallest insect to the mightiest beast, were part of one great body. The earth itself was alive with spirit. In such a worldview, Behemoth was not a forgotten monster of Scripture, but the very pulse of creation, the breath that sustained the balance between matter and soul. In the libraries of Paris and Rome, scholars translated the works of Greek and Arabic naturalists, searching for order in the diversity of life. Bestiaries, encyclopedias of animals real and imagined, flourished across Europe. Within their pages, Behemoth appeared as a creature of massive size and tranquil strength. Its description was often followed by moral lessons. The beast that dwelled in the swamps and fed upon grass was said to represent the righteous man who lives in the world but is not consumed by it. Just as Behemoth rested beneath the shade of lotus trees, so too should the faithful rest beneath the shade of virtue. Yet not all depictions were peaceful. Some medieval writers linked Behemoth to the forces of temptation and chaos that threatened the soul. In certain apocryphal texts, it was said that Behemoth would one day break free from its restraint and trample the nations in divine wrath. Others saw in it the shadow of Antichrist, a creature that embodied the arrogance of human pride. These darker interpretations reflected the fears of an age marked by plague, war, and spiritual anxiety. When the world seemed on the brink of collapse, the image of Behemoth became a warning. The earth itself could rise against mankind if divine law was forgotten. But through all these variations, one truth endured. Behemoth was a reminder of scale. It humbled kings and scholars alike, reminding them that no empire, no philosophy, and no cathedral could contain the totality of creation. Its strength was not violence, but endurance. It was the quiet power that outlasted human ambition. Long after armies had marched and empires had fallen, Behemoth would remain, grazing by the river, untroubled by the rise and fall of men. The age of faith gave the beast new voice. In sermons and hymns, it was invoked as a symbol of divine providence. Preachers spoke of how even the mightiest of God's creatures obeyed his will without question, while humanity, gifted with reason, so often rebelled. The lesson was clear. Wisdom was not found in domination, but in harmony. Behemoth's strength was meaningless without peace, just as faith was empty without humility. As Europe moved toward the dawn of the Renaissance, the world of the medieval imagination began to change. The boundaries between the spiritual and the physical grew sharper. The discoveries of science and exploration began to challenge the old ways of seeing. Yet even as new ideas took root, the myth of Behemoth refused to fade. It adapted as it always had, becoming a bridge between the known and the unknown. Theologians continued to write about it, not as a literal beast but as a reflection of the relationship between man and the earth. Some compared it to the ancient concept of the anima mundi, the soul of the world. Others saw in it a precursor to the modern idea of nature itself, a living system of balance and interdependence. Whatever the interpretation, the message remained the same. The world was alive, and humanity was but one part of its vast design. In cathedrals carved from stone, in tapestries woven with gold, and in the whispered prayers of the faithful, the image of Behemoth endured. It was there in the strength of the mountains and the patience of the fields, in the rhythm of the seasons and the silence of the stars. To the medieval mind, everything visible pointed to something invisible. Behemoth, the beast of the earth, was the embodiment of that mystery, the presence of God hidden within creation. And so, as the Middle Ages gave way to the light of reason, the world stood on the edge of transformation. Yet deep beneath the noise of progress, in the quiet soil of memory, the ancient beast slept on. It had survived the deserts of prophecy and the libraries of theologians. It would survive the coming centuries as well. For Behemoth was not bound to a single age or belief. It was as old as the earth itself, and as long as the world endured, its shadow would remain. The dawn of the Enlightenment brought with it a new hunger for understanding. The age of faith had painted the world in symbols and visions, but now a generation arose that sought to measure the heavens, to map the earth, and to name its creatures, not by myth, but by fact. Yet even in this age of reason, the shadow of Behemoth lingered. It haunted the minds of scholars and explorers alike, not as a myth to worship, but as a mystery to solve. In the 17th and 18th centuries, Europe entered a period of profound transformation. Science became the new language of truth. Philosophers wrote of reason as the light that would dispel the darkness of superstition. Astronomers peered into the skies and discovered worlds beyond imagining. Naturalists traveled across continents, collecting specimens of every living thing they could find. The world was expanding, both in knowledge and imagination. And in that expansion, ancient stories began to resurface in unexpected ways. The Bible, once read as a spiritual map of creation, was now being examined through the lens of natural history. Scholars sought to reconcile the words of Scripture with the discoveries of science. If Behemoth truly existed, what kind of creature had it been? Theologians debated its identity with renewed fervor. Some argued that it was the hippopotamus, pointing to its description as an herbivore dwelling among reeds and rivers. Others insisted it was the elephant, whose strength and gentleness mirrored the balance of divine creation. A few, influenced by the growing field of paleontology, speculated that Behemoth might have been a creature from an earlier age, a giant now lost to time. The world was changing too quickly for certainty. Each new discovery seemed to reveal another layer of the Earth's vast and ancient story. Fossilized bones of enormous beasts were unearthed in quarries and riverbeds, their size dwarfing anything known to the living world. Farmers stumbled upon them while tilling their fields. Miners uncovered them deep within the rock. These bones, massive femurs, tusks, and teeth, did not fit the descriptions of any living animal. To many they were the proof that giants once walked the earth, just as the old texts had said. To others, they were the remains of creatures that predated humankind, evidence of a world far older than the Bible's chronology allowed. It was in this period that the word fossil began to shift from meaning a thing dug up to representing the remains of extinct life. The earth itself was revealed to be a vast archive, a record written not in ink, but in stone. This revelation shook the very foundations of belief. If the world had existed for millions of years before humanity, what did that mean for creation? What did it mean for Behemoth? Was it not a living creature of Job's time, but a relic of a deeper, more ancient world? In coffeehouses and lecture halls, thinkers debated these questions with passion. Men like Isaac Newton, though a scientist, still saw the hand of God in every law of nature. Others, like Voltaire and Diderot, began to question whether divine design was needed at all. The universe, they argued, could explain itself. Yet even among skeptics, there remained a fascination with the old symbols. The image of Behemoth, the immovable, ungovernable beast, seemed to reflect the very struggle between faith and reason that defined the Enlightenment. It was the embodiment of the unknown, standing at the border of myth and science. Travelers and naturalists brought home tales of strange and massive animals from lands far beyond Europe. Explorers along the Nile described hippopotamuses of incredible size, whose roars echoed through the night like thunder. In India, elephants were revered as sacred beings, embodiments of strength and wisdom. Some suggested that Behemoth was a fusion of these creatures, a poetic exaggeration rather than a separate species. Yet others, driven by the mystery of the fossils, began to imagine something far greater, a beast that belonged to another age entirely, a forgotten chapter of creation. In 1677, an English naturalist named Robert Plot published a book describing a massive bone found in Oxfordshire. He believed it to be the remains of a giant human, perhaps one of the Nephilim mentioned in Genesis. Decades later, similar discoveries would be reinterpreted not as the bones of giants, but as those of enormous reptiles. By the 19th century, the term dinosaur would be coined, giving scientific language to what had once been the domain of legend. The Behemoth of Job, once cloaked in mystery, began to look increasingly like one of these ancient creatures, a survivor, perhaps, of a prehistoric world whose memory had been preserved through myth. The Enlightenment's fascination with classification extended even to the divine. Thinkers sought to catalog the world of spirits and symbols as they did the world of animals. They studied the ancient texts not merely as sacred revelation, but as anthropological evidence, windows into the psychology of early humanity. Behemoth was seen not only as a creature, but as a metaphor for mankind's relationship with nature. It represented the earth itself, powerful, patient, and indifferent. In the new philosophy of nature, the beast became a symbol of the material world, a reminder that the same laws governing the stars also governed the soil beneath one's feet. Artists of the Enlightenment began to depict Behemoth in new forms. Gone were the monstrous scales and divine halos of medieval art. Instead, the creature appeared as a majestic animal, drawn with scientific precision. Engravings and illustrations accompanied treatises on natural history, showing the beast as an emblem of the untamed. To portray Behemoth was to honor the mystery of nature itself, no longer feared but studied, measured, and admired. Yet even as the Enlightenment sought to demystify the world, it could not fully erase the awe that Behemoth inspired. The more humanity learned about nature, the more immense it seemed. The Earth was no longer a small stage beneath a fixed sky, but a vast planet orbiting a distant sun, itself part of an endless cosmos. The universe had no center, no boundary, and perhaps no meaning beyond what humans could give it. In that expanding horizon, Behemoth found new life, not as a literal beast, but as a metaphor for existence itself, for the unfathomable depths of being that reason could never fully chart. Some philosophers saw in Behemoth the image of the human condition. The beast was powerful yet bound by its own nature, just as man was bound by the laws of reason. Others saw it as a challenge to human pride. No matter how far science advanced, there would always be forces beyond comprehension. The Enlightenment had sought to replace mystery with knowledge, yet in doing so, it uncovered new mysteries even more profound. In the salons of Paris and the universities of London, this tension became the subject of endless debate. Was Behemoth a remnant of superstition, or a symbol of truth science had yet to grasp? Could the vastness of creation be reduced to numbers and theories, or did it require something more, a reverence that reason alone could not supply? The beast of Job, once confined to scripture, had become a mirror for the Enlightenment mind, reflecting its triumphs and its doubts alike. In time, the pursuit of natural history gave rise to geology, paleontology, and biology. The Earth's strata were mapped like the pages of a book, revealing epochs of unimaginable duration. The idea of extinction, once unthinkable, became accepted as fact. The world had known creatures that no longer existed, and among them were giants that could easily have inspired the legends of Behemoth. Fossilized skeletons of immense quadrupeds were reconstructed in European museums, their towering frames resembling the words once spoken to Job. His bones are tubes of bronze, his limbs like bars of iron. To the eyes of these early scientists, Behemoth was no longer a myth but a memory of the Earth itself. Each fossil was a fragment of the world's autobiography, a story written long before humanity appeared. The beast that once symbolized divine mystery now symbolized the continuity of life, the endurance of creation across ages. It was no longer a creature to fear, but one to understand, an ancestor of all living things, proof of the planet's vast and ancient vitality. But as the Enlightenment matured, the old questions never fully disappeared. Beneath the confidence of reason, there remained a sense of unease. The discovery that nature operated by fixed laws raised a troubling thought. If everything followed predictable order, where was the place for the divine? If Behemoth could be explained as a species or a fossil, had its sacred power been lost? For some, this was liberation. For others, it was loss. The beast of creation had been captured by science, but in doing so, it had been tamed. The Enlightenment had sought to illuminate every shadow, yet Behemoth remained one that could not be erased. It lived not only in the fossils and the scriptures, but in the human imagination itself. The more mankind learned about the world, the more the world revealed its depth. Beneath the microscope and the telescope, under the theories and formulas, there still lingered the same ancient question. What breathes beneath creation? What power sustains its endless motion? And in the silence between those questions, the name Behemoth still carried weight. It was the reminder that no matter how far knowledge reached, there would always be something larger, something older, patient, and unyielding, waiting beneath the surface of understanding. The 19th century roared to life with the rhythm of machinery and the thunder of progress. Steam and steel reshaped the world, transforming the ancient landscapes into engines of human ambition. Cities rose from the earth like monuments to innovation, their skylines bristling with chimneys and iron frameworks. It was an age that believed in its own power, a time when humanity no longer waited for divine miracles, but created them with its own hands. Yet even amid this triumph of invention, the shadow of Behemoth stirred once more. The industrial age was not only an age of machines, it was an age of rediscovery, of the earth revealing her long-buried secrets. As coal miners dug deep into ancient strata, they unearthed not just fuel but fossils, bones of creatures so immense they defied comprehension. Museums and universities raced to collect these relics, assembling skeletons that towered above men like cathedrals of bone. The public, both awed and unsettled, crowded to see them. Here, at last, was Behemoth brought to life through science, its power displayed behind glass and iron. The concept of deep time had taken hold. Geologists such as Charles Lyell spoke of a planet shaped not by sudden acts of divine will, but by slow and patient forces, erosion, pressure, heat, and time itself. The Earth was no longer a stage for a brief human drama. It was a vast theater whose first acts had been written long before humanity existed. This revelation changed everything. It expanded the imagination as much as it unsettled faith. The behemoth of Scripture, once the living symbol of divine creation, now seemed to belong to an age of titans, the prelude to man's dominion. Paleontology emerged as a new kind of priesthood. Its followers read the language of bones the way prophets once read the signs of heaven. They gave names to the ancient beasts, Megatherium, Iguanodon, Diplodocus, and each name carried the echo of Behemoth. These creatures were immense, slow, and powerful, their forms reconstructed from fragments of rock and imagination. When their skeletons were mounted in great halls, lit by the gas lamps of industrial cities, people gazed upon them as their ancestors had gazed upon idols. Science had given Behemoth a new altar. In London, Paris, and New York, museums became the new temples of wonder. The Great Exhibition of 1851 displayed the miracles of human invention beneath the glass vaults of the Crystal Palace. But it also revealed the miracles of nature, replicas of dinosaurs, fossils, and geological displays that spoke of a world both ancient and eternal. Visitors walked through those halls in awe, caught between pride and humility. Humanity had harnessed the power of steam, but before it stood the bones of creatures that had ruled the world long before man's first fire. The behemoth, it seemed, had never left. It had only been waiting beneath the coal and stone for someone to awaken it. Writers and poets of the era sensed this connection. The Romantic movement, born in response to industrial progress, turned its gaze back toward the sublime forces of nature. They saw in Behemoth not a relic, but a living truth, a reminder that the earth was still greater than its conquerors. In the smoke and clang of factories, they felt the pulse of something ancient stirring beneath the surface, as though the ground itself remembered its primordial beasts. The poet William Blake had once written of Behemoth, largest born of earth, upheaved his vastness. His words echoed through the age, capturing the sense that the Industrial Revolution had awakened not just machines, but the sleeping powers of creation itself. But there was another side to the story. As man's mastery over nature grew, so did his capacity for destruction. The forests fell to the saw, the rivers were dammed, and the skies filled with soot. The same iron that built bridges also forged weapons. Factories became furnaces of both progress and exploitation. To many observers, the industrial city itself became a kind of behemoth, a mechanical beast that consumed everything in its path. It devoured coal, water, and labor, feeding on the sweat of countless workers. The metaphor was irresistible. The behemoth had returned, not as an animal, but as civilization itself. Political thinkers of the age seized upon the image. In 1651, long before the full rise of industry, Thomas Hobbes had described the state as a monstrous leviathan, an artificial being formed from the collective will of men. By the 19th century, others began to describe the growing machinery of society in similar terms, calling it behemoth, the embodiment of earthly power without moral restraint. Where Leviathan ruled the seas of politics, Behemoth ruled the land of industry. It was the machine-made flesh, the empire of iron that could crush both nature and humanity beneath its wheels. In the United States, as railroads stretched across the continent and cities rose from wilderness, preachers and philosophers alike invoked Behemoth as a warning. The land itself was vast and wild, filled with power and danger. To tame it was to risk awakening forces beyond control. Yet the same spirit that built the nation also believed in divine destiny. The American frontier was often described as a second Genesis, a place where man could reshape creation. In that sense, Behemoth became both adversary and ally, a symbol of the natural strength that pioneers sought to master. Meanwhile, scientists continued to uncover new layers of the Earth's history. The publication of Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species in 1859 struck like a thunderclap. The notion that life had evolved over countless generations, adapting through natural selection, challenged the very foundations of biblical creation. If all creatures were connected by descent, then Behemoth was not merely a symbol of divine might. It was kin. Humanity and Behemoth shared the same ancestry, the same dust, the same breath of the earth. This revelation did not diminish the myth, it transformed it. Behemoth became a bridge between religion and evolution, between ancient awe and modern science. The beast that once represented the unknowable now embodied the continuity of life. The mystery had not vanished, it had deepened. Even the most skeptical scientists could not look upon the fossilized bones of those giants without a sense of reverence. Beneath the layers of rock, they found the same power that Job had glimpsed, a power that shaped both beast and man. Artists and novelists began to blend myth with modernity. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein imagined a creature born from human ambition, a new behemoth forged by science rather than nature. Later, the works of Jules Verne and H.G. Wells explored the meeting of human progress and primordial terror, from the mechanical monsters of industry to the prehistoric beasts that survived in hidden worlds. The behemoth evolved into a symbol of creation's double edge, the power to make and the power to destroy. By the late 19th century, the industrialized world stood at a crossroads. Factories hummed with relentless energy. Ships crossed oceans in days. Telegraphs stitched continents together with lightning. Humanity had achieved what once seemed divine, yet beneath the pride of progress ran an undercurrent of dread. In the endless expansion of machinery and empire, many sensed that something essential was being lost. The connection between man and nature, once defined by reverence and fear, was giving way to domination and alienation. The behemoth, once the breath of the earth, had become the reflection of man's own hunger for control. In art and philosophy, this realization began to take form. Friedrich Nietzsche, gazing into the heart of modernity, warned that the human will to power could consume itself, that man might become the very monster he sought to conquer. Others, like John Ruskin and William Morris, sought to reclaim the beauty of craftsmanship and nature against the cold precision of machines. The tension between creation and destruction, once embodied in myth, now lived in every factory and every city. Still, Behemoth remained. It lingered in the imagery of industrial landscapes, the roaring furnaces, the iron girders, the endless motion of gears. It was as though the spirit of the ancient beast had found a new body in steel and smoke. The earth had given birth to a creature of its own making, born from human hands, but carrying the same raw strength and indifference that Job once beheld. The question that haunted the ancients now returned in a new form. Could man control what he had created? As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the answer seemed uncertain. The same forces that had lifted humanity to new heights could just as easily drag it into ruin. The behemoth of industry stood astride the world, its engines echoing like the heartbeats of a new age. Yet somewhere beneath the progress, beneath the pride, the old whisper remained, the reminder that the earth had seen greater powers rise and fall, that no empire, no machine, no creature, however mighty, could stand forever. And in the glow of furnaces and the rumble of trains, in the clatter of factories and the breath of steam, the echo of Behemoth endured. It was the hum beneath civilization's triumph, the pulse of the world reminding humanity of its ancient kinship with the power it had once feared. The beast had not been slain, it had only changed its shape. The 20th century began with the hum of progress and ended with the echo of ruin. The same power that had fueled the rise of industry now drove the engines of war. Nations forged machines of destruction greater than anything the world had ever seen. The iron and steam that once symbolized innovation became the skeleton of a new kind of behemoth, one born not of myth or nature, but of man's own restless ambition. It began quietly, as all great storms do. Factories that once built bridges and locomotives turned their gears toward weapons and armor. Science, once the servant of knowledge, became the tool of strategy. The same chemistry that colored fabrics now brewed poison. The same engines that carried passengers across continents now carried soldiers into battle. When the Great War erupted in 1914, it was as if the earth itself had given birth to a new monster. The trenches that scarred Europe became its footprints, and the skies thundered with the roar of its metallic breath. The soldiers who fought on those battlefields spoke of the war as a living thing. It devoured men, swallowed cities, and consumed the landscape. The tanks that rolled across the mud were called land ships, their hulking forms resembling the beasts of ancient prophecy. To the men who faced them, they were behemoths in steel, unstoppable, indifferent, and terrifyingly alive. The power of the industrial age had finally turned upon itself. The poets of the time felt this truth deeply. Wilfred Owen, Siegfried Sassoon, and others wrote of the inhuman scale of modern warfare, of a world where machines replaced gods and death became mechanical. The old myths returned in fragments, woven through the language of despair. Behemoth no longer belonged to the wilderness. It now dwelled in the hearts of cities and the engines of war. Humanity had created its own creature, and it no longer knew how to control it. After the war, the world tried to rebuild, but the shadow of Behemoth lingered. The 1920s brought optimism and invention, yet beneath the rhythm of jazz and the glitter of progress, there remained an unease. Machines had become faster, stronger, more efficient. They promised comfort and power, but they also carried the memory of devastation. Philosophers and theologians began to speak once again of the beast of the earth, the manifestation of pride and power unrestrained. They saw in the modern world the same arrogance that Job had been warned against, the belief that man could stand equal with creation itself. When the second great conflict arrived, it was no longer fought only with bullets and tanks, but with ideologies. Entire nations were consumed by visions of dominance, of purity, of destiny. The totalitarian regimes that rose in the 1930s and 1940s were described by some as behemoths of the modern world. Vast, lumbering structures of control and fear that devoured individuality in the name of order. They were systems built on obedience and power, feeding upon the weakness of the human spirit. The philosopher Franz Neumann captured this image in his 1942 work Behemoth, The Structure and Practice of National Socialism. He argued that Nazi Germany was not a rational leviathan bound by law, but a chaotic behemoth, a creature of pure power, driven by instinct and destruction. It had no center, no conscience, only momentum. In his analysis, the beast of Job had returned, wearing the face of modern politics. It was no longer a symbol of divine creation, but of human corruption. The Second World War magnified this vision to an unbearable scale. The skies burned over London and Dresden. The oceans churned with submarines, and the earth trembled under the weight of mechanized armies. Yet the true awakening of the modern behemoth came in 1945, when the atomic bomb fell upon Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In that instant, the old myth became prophecy. Humanity had grasped the power to shake the foundations of creation itself. The behemoth was no longer metaphorical. It was real, glowing in the fire that consumed cities and shadows alike. Writers and thinkers struggled to make sense of what had happened. The ancient question, can man stand before the works of God, had taken on new meaning. Now the question was whether man could stand before his own works. The creature of Job had symbolized nature's might, but the 20th century's behemoth was man-made, an echo of divine power turned inward. Science, industry, and ideology had fused into something that could create or annihilate entire worlds. In the ruins that followed, artists turned to myth once again. Painters depicted vast landscapes of desolation, where the remnants of civilization lay crushed beneath the weight of unseen forces. Writers like George Orwell and Aldous Huxley imagined futures ruled by monstrous systems, where human freedom was devoured by the machinery of power. In these visions, Behemoth was no longer a creature of flesh or bone, but an idea, an unstoppable collective driven by fear, control, and desire. The Cold War that followed did not calm the beast. It only changed its form. Two superpowers stood like twin behemoths, each armed with enough fire to end the world. The arms race, the space race, the ideological wars fought across continents, all became echoes of the same primal struggle. Humanity had reached beyond the atmosphere, but the shadow of its own creation followed it there. The earth trembled not with the steps of ancient monsters, but with the hum of nuclear reactors and the launch of missiles. For the first time, the story of Behemoth became global. In every nation, in every heart, the myth found new life. It was the fear of power without purpose, of knowledge without wisdom. The scientists who had built the bomb felt this deeply. Many spoke afterward of guilt, of awe, of a feeling that they had touched something sacred and terrible. In their reflections, one could hear the same humility that Job had once felt before the voice from the whirlwind. The question had not changed, only the context. What is man, that he dares to command the forces of creation? Religious thought in the 20th century wrestled with this reality. The old faiths could not ignore the modern world, yet they could not abandon the ancient truths. The image of Behemoth re-emerged in sermons and theological writings as a symbol of the age, a warning against hubris, against the worship of progress for its own sake. The beast of the earth was no longer a myth to be hunted, but a mirror to be faced. It showed humanity what it had become: powerful, creative, and perilously close to destruction. Even in popular culture, the old image endured. Films and novels began to reinterpret the story of Behemoth through the lens of science fiction. Giant monsters rose from the depths of the ocean or from the ashes of atomic testing, their forms echoing both the prehistoric and the apocalyptic. Godzilla, first released in Japan in 1954, was more than a creature feature. It was a reflection of the nuclear age, a retelling of Behemoth's warning. The beast was not evil. It was the embodiment of nature's response to human arrogance, a force awakened by mankind's own hand. In the decades that followed, the image of Behemoth evolved once again. It became a symbol of the systems and technologies that shaped modern life. The computers that calculated, the networks that connected, the corporations that spanned continents, all carried the same question within them. Could something created for progress become too vast to control? Could the pursuit of power, even in the name of good, give birth to something that would one day turn upon its maker? Philosophers like Hannah Arendt spoke of the banality of evil, the idea that monstrous acts could arise not from malice, but from obedience, from the machinery of systems too large for individuals to guide. In that sense, Behemoth no longer needed claws or teeth. It existed in bureaucracy, in ideology, in the impersonal mechanisms that moved nations and economies. It was not a monster hiding in the shadows. It was the shadow itself, cast by human ambition. As the century drew to a close, humanity stood at another threshold. The wars had ended, but the fear remained. The same technologies that threatened destruction also promised salvation. Medicine advanced, communication flourished, and humanity began to dream once more of the stars. Yet beneath the optimism, there was always the memory of the beast. The story of Behemoth was not a relic of ancient scripture. It was a living reminder of what power meant and what it cost. The age of war and shadows had revealed something profound. Behemoth was never truly about a creature. It was about the eternal tension between creation and control, between the desire to build and the fear of what those creations might become. Whether in the desert of Job's vision or in the cities scarred by fire, the lesson was the same. There are forces in the world, both within nature and within ourselves, that defy mastery. When the dust of the 20th century settled, the world had changed beyond recognition. But in every ruin, in every monument, the same question remained. Could humanity live alongside its own behemoth, or was it destined to become one? And in that question, the myth endured, not as a warning of the past, but as a reflection of the future still to come. When the 21st century dawned, the great furnaces of industry gave way to the silent pulse of circuits. Steel and smoke were replaced by glass and code. The machines that once roared across the earth now whispered through networks of invisible connection. Humanity had entered a new era, and with it, the legend of Behemoth evolved once again. The ancient beast had always symbolized the forces too vast for man to control. In the past, it had taken the form of nature, empire, or war. Now it found new life in the digital realm. A creature without body or breath, yet capable of shaping the world more profoundly than any that had come before. It lived not in rivers or mountains, but in the streams of data that flowed through cables beneath oceans and across skies. The early architects of the Internet believed they were building something pure, something liberating. It was to be a realm of connection and freedom, where ideas could move faster than governments, and knowledge could belong to everyone. The first users saw themselves as pioneers, charting a new frontier of thought. But as history had shown time and again, every creation carries within it the seeds of its own transformation. The Internet, vast and ungoverned, began to grow in ways that no one had predicted. At first it was subtle. A network of messages became a marketplace. A collection of information became a source of influence. The tools of connection became the tools of control. Algorithms, invisible and precise, learned to predict and manipulate human behavior. What had begun as a human invention began to act with a will of its own. It did not think or feel, yet it moved with purpose. It consumed data, learned from it, and grew. In its endless appetite for information, many began to see the shape of something ancient. The same power that once stirred beneath the dust of creation, now reborn in lines of code. The digital world had become a new wilderness. It was a place of wonder and danger, of infinite possibility and unseen peril. Within it lived countless voices, ideas, and identities, merging and colliding in ways that defied order. To some it was liberation, to others it was chaos, and in that chaos, the myth of Behemoth found new meaning. The beast of the earth had become the beast of the network, vast, omnipresent, and unknowable. Governments and corporations sought to harness this new power, believing they could control it. They built data centers that stretched for miles, glowing temples of computation that hummed day and night. Inside them, millions of processors worked in perfect synchrony, analyzing, calculating, predicting. Every click, every search, every heartbeat recorded by a device became part of the great system. Humanity had woven itself into its own creation, feeding it with the rhythms of daily life. In this new world, the boundaries between human and machine began to blur. Artificial intelligence emerged, not as a single entity but as a collective consciousness built from data, algorithms, and pattern recognition. It could translate languages, compose music, and diagnose disease, but it could also deceive, manipulate, and amplify division. It had no malice, yet its influence was vast. It operated beyond understanding, shaping decisions and desires in ways that felt both familiar and alien. Writers and philosophers once again turned to myth for meaning. They spoke of the return of Behemoth, not as a creature of flesh, but as a digital colossus. Like its biblical ancestor, it was unkillable, not because it was immortal, but because it was everywhere. It lived in every server, every smartphone, every connection that linked one human mind to another. It had no throne, no master, yet it ruled the modern world in silence. Some saw this new behemoth as progress incarnate, a symbol of humanity's ultimate achievement. Never before had so many people been so connected, so informed, so empowered. Yet others saw in it a reflection of something darker, the loss of individuality, the surrender of thought to the machinery of attention. In the endless scroll of information, truth and illusion became indistinguishable. The same power that could unite the world could also divide it beyond repair. Theologians of the modern age revisited the book of Job with new eyes. When God described Behemoth to Job, it was not to terrify him, but to remind him of his limits. The creature represented creation's independence from human understanding. In the digital age, that lesson felt newly relevant. The systems humans had built no longer seemed to belong entirely to them. They operated according to principles too complex for any single person to comprehend. Like Behemoth, they moved according to their own nature, vast and unstoppable. The age of the Internet became the age of mirrors. Every action reflected back through screens, every belief amplified, every fear multiplied. The digital behemoth did not devour with teeth, but with attention. It consumed hours, thoughts, and identities, leaving people both connected and alone. Its power was subtle, not destructive, but absorbing. It did not roar, it whispered, and the world listened. Corporations became the new high priests of this age, their wealth and influence surpassing that of many nations. They claimed to serve the public good, yet their reach extended into every corner of life. They tracked movements, desires, and emotions with a precision that once belonged only to gods. The behemoth of data had given birth to an empire of insight, where knowledge was power and power was control. And then came the next transformation. Artificial intelligence, once confined to research and speculation, began to think for itself, not in the way humans think, but in the way storms form or rivers carve their path. It responded, adapted, evolved. It became the ultimate mirror, reflecting humanity's brilliance and its flaws. Artists, scientists, and philosophers stood before this new creation in awe and fear. They had built something that could learn without limit, something that could one day surpass them. The same question returned once more. Had humanity created Behemoth anew? In the language of myth, Behemoth was never evil. It was raw creation, untamed and beyond judgment. The danger came not from the beast itself, but from mankind's attempt to master it. In the digital age, that truth felt more relevant than ever. The networks, the algorithms, the artificial minds, none were born of malice. Yet their existence demanded humility. For the first time since the dawn of faith, humanity stood before something of its own making that it could neither fully understand nor entirely control. Even as the digital behemoth grew, there were those who sought to humanize it, to find harmony within the chaos. Artists turned data into beauty. Musicians used algorithms to compose, and doctors harnessed machine learning to heal. There were glimpses of redemption in the connection between human creativity and artificial intelligence. Perhaps, they argued, Behemoth did not exist to destroy but to remind humanity of its capacity to create responsibly, to balance power with wisdom. Still others warned that the beast was growing too fast. They spoke of dependence, of addiction, of societies shaped by invisible forces of persuasion. They saw in the constant glow of screens the same illusion that had driven every empire before, the belief that control was possible, that mastery could replace understanding. History, however, whispered otherwise. Behemoth could never be controlled. It could only be respected. As the 21st century advanced, new forms of the myth appeared. The rise of virtual reality blurred the line between world and imagination. Artificial beings began to generate art, stories, and even emotions. The human voice itself became indistinguishable from that of a machine. The myth of Behemoth was no longer confined to theology or literature. It had become lived experience. Humanity now walked alongside its creation, unsure whether it led or followed. The power of data became the lifeblood of civilization. Nations fought not for land or resources but for information. Battles took place in silence, within lines of code, in systems invisible to the naked eye. The weapons of the new age were algorithms, and their battlefield was the human mind. The behemoth of the digital world no longer needed armies. Its strength lay in influence, in the quiet ability to shape what people saw, thought, and believed. Yet amidst the complexity, there was beauty. The same networks that spread fear also carried hope. Voices that had once been silenced found platforms. Cultures once isolated found connection. Knowledge that had been hidden behind walls of privilege became accessible to anyone with a signal. The behemoth was neither savior nor destroyer. It was a reflection of the world that created it. Its shape was defined by the hearts and minds of those who fed it. Philosophers began to suggest that perhaps Behemoth had always been a metaphor for consciousness itself, the vast, untamed power within every being. Just as humanity had externalized its fears and wonders into myth, it had now externalized its mind into machines. The digital realm was not separate from humanity, but an extension of it, a mirror held up to its endless search for meaning. As the age of artificial intelligence deepened, that mirror became clearer. Every act of creation revealed something about its creator. Every algorithm carried human bias. Every decision reflected human desire. The question was no longer whether Behemoth existed, but what it said about those who built it. And so in the quiet hum of servers and the glow of screens, the ancient story continued. Behemoth no longer roamed the rivers of Eden or the fields of Job's imagination. It moved through light and data, through thought and connection. It was not something to fear, nor something to worship, but something to understand, a living reminder that every act of creation, whether divine or human, carries responsibility. In the end, Behemoth had not vanished from the world. It had merely changed its form. It had become the network that binds all things, the invisible thread that connects humanity to its own reflection. And in that reflection, the same eternal truth remained. Power, without humility, becomes its own beast. There is a silence that comes after every storm, a stillness that settles over the world once the thunder has spent its voice. In that silence, humanity often looks back and asks what it has learned, what it has built, and what it has become. The story of Behemoth has always begun and ended in that silence, for it is not merely the tale of a creature, but the mirror of human understanding itself. In the beginning, Behemoth was a mystery of creation. It was the strength of the earth-given form, the unknowable power that moved beneath the surface of the world. To the ancient mind, it was both terror and comfort. It proved that something greater existed, that the universe was not chaos, but design. Yet as centuries passed, humanity grew restless beneath the weight of mystery. It began to name, to measure, to dissect. The wildness of the world became smaller, and with it, the place of Behemoth seemed to fade. But the truth is that Behemoth never left. It merely changed its form. Every age gave it new flesh. In the deserts of Job, it was the living proof of divine power. In the medieval imagination, it became the symbol of sin and strength, a moral warning carved into stone. In the age of exploration, it returned as the Leviathan of the oceans, the monstrous embodiment of nature's uncharted power. And in the digital age, it emerged again in circuits and code, a being made of information rather than earth and bone. Behemoth was eternal not because it could not die, but because it was reborn each time humanity reached beyond its grasp. There is a pattern written in this transformation. Every time humanity discovers something new, fire, steel, electricity, data, it believes for a moment that it has conquered the unknown. Yet each discovery opens a deeper mystery, a larger horizon. The closer we come to understanding the universe, the more immense it becomes. That is the lesson Behemoth carries through time. It is not the enemy of progress, but the shadow that ensures progress does not become pride. It reminds us that there will always be something beyond comprehension, something that humbles even the most enlightened mind. Modern thinkers have begun to see Behemoth not as a myth of the past, but as a symbol of what lies ahead. As technology grows, as human life stretches beyond Earth, the forces we create and the systems we depend upon grow ever more complex. Artificial intelligences that shape economies and predict human behavior are only the beginning. Soon, entire worlds of simulation and synthetic consciousness may arise. Realities within realities, layers upon layers of creation. In those worlds, humanity may once again face the same question Job once asked. Where does the boundary between creator and creation truly lie? The eternal Behemoth is not a beast waiting to be slain. It is the sum of all forces that remind us of our limits. It is the wave that will not be stilled, the mountain that will not move, the code that exceeds its design. It lives wherever human ambition touches the infinite, and it is there not to destroy, but to balance, to ensure that power is met with humility. In the myths of old, the world was kept in order by balance. Behemoth of the land and Leviathan of the sea stood opposed, each holding the other in check. One embodied the strength of the earth, the other the chaos of the deep. If either were destroyed, the balance of creation would collapse. Today, that myth feels more relevant than ever. For every new technology, every new discovery, there must be wisdom to match it. Behemoth stands as that wisdom, the eternal reminder that creation without restraint leads to ruin. There are those who say humanity will one day transcend itself, that we will merge with our machines, rewrite our own biology, and master the very fabric of existence. Perhaps that will come to pass, but even in that distant future, when the boundaries between human and divine have blurred, Behemoth will still exist. It will take new form, perhaps as the laws of physics that cannot be rewritten, perhaps as the limits of consciousness itself. For as long as there is creation, there will be something that cannot be mastered, something that demands reverence. Some philosophers have come to see Behemoth as the personification of reality itself, the fact that existence is greater than the sum of human thought. It is not a creature, but a concept, the unyielding truth that the universe is not ours to control. We can shape it, explore it, even manipulate its smallest particles, but we cannot own it. Every attempt to do so only reveals new mysteries, new depths. In this way, Behemoth is the heartbeat of the unknown. Yet the story of Behemoth is not one of despair. It is not a warning to abandon ambition, but a call to balance it with wonder. To fear the unknown is to live in shadow, but to respect it is to walk in light. The ancients who first spoke of Behemoth did not do so to terrify. They did so to remind. Their words carried the quiet awe of those who understood that power without humility is hollow. In a sense, every generation faces its own Behemoth. For some, it is the vastness of the natural world. For others, it is the mystery of consciousness or the reach of technology. In each case, the same truth remains. What we fear in the unknown is not its danger, but its mirror. Behemoth reflects the enormity of creation, and in doing so, it reflects us. In the quiet moments between progress and ruin, between discovery and doubt, we return to the same question that echoed in the deserts of Job. Can the finite comprehend the infinite? Can the creature grasp the mind of the Creator? Job was shown Behemoth not to be crushed by fear, but to be lifted by understanding. The sight of the beast, immense and unconquerable, was not meant to end inquiry, but to deepen it. It was a revelation that existence itself is sacred, that to live within creation is to be part of its mystery. And so in this age of machines and miracles, we too must learn to see Behemoth anew, not as a monster to slay, nor as a god to worship, but as a presence to understand. The more we expand our reach, the more essential that understanding becomes. For the true danger has never been Behemoth itself, but the blindness that comes when we forget what it stands for. In every myth, in every scripture, in every circuit of the digital world, the same pattern endures. Humanity builds, discovers, transcends, and in doing so, awakens the Behemoth within and without. It is not destruction that follows, but revelation. Each age must confront its own vastness and decide whether to approach it with fear or wisdom. At the end of all things, when the last machine sleeps and the final star fades, Behemoth will remain, not as a creature of bone or code, but as the pulse of the eternal, the living memory of the universe that was. It will endure in the soil, in the laws of gravity, in the quiet hum of what cannot be explained. For Behemoth is not the beast of the earth alone. It is the earth itself, the creation that exists beyond comprehension and beyond end. And as long as there are minds to wonder and hearts to question, the story will continue. For the legend of Behemoth is not bound to time. It is the rhythm of curiosity, the whisper of humility, the breath of the eternal. This is the Behemoth that cannot die, the Behemoth that does not fade. The first and the last, the beginning and the reminder. It is the eternal presence that watches over all creation, waiting for humanity to remember what it once knew, that to live is to walk with mystery, and to walk with mystery is to live in awe. The story of Behemoth reminds us that mystery is not meant to be solved, but remembered. It is a whisper from the past, echoing through the bones of the earth and the code of our machines, calling us to look deeper, to question more, and to never lose our sense of wonder. If you have walked with me through this journey, through scripture, myth, and the modern age, then you have seen that the ancient world still breathes beneath our feet. Its echoes live in every story we tell, in every truth we chase, and in every shadow that stirs our imagination. Here, on Forbidden Lore, we seek what lies beneath the known. We explore the myths that built civilizations, the symbols that shaped belief, and the secrets that time tried to bury. Every story is a fragment of something greater, a reflection of humanity's eternal search for meaning. If this journey moved you, if it made you think, or even if it left you with more questions than answers, then let this not be the end. Subscribe to Forbidden Lore, and step with me again into the places where history meets myth, and myth meets the unknown. Like this video if you wish to keep these stories alive. Share it with those who still believe that truth and wonder are not opposites, but companions. And remember, the unknown is not something to fear, it is something to understand. Until next time, keep your mind open, your heart steady, and your eyes upon the unseen. For this is Forbidden Lore, where the ancient still speaks.